Welcome to the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major for Justice Advocacy Competition, hosted by the National Bar Association. The Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major for Justice Advocacy Competition is a contest designed to motivate high school students to excel in education. The competition encourages students to express their views on a pre-selected topic and focuses on the ability of the student to communicate orally and in writing. The contest is also designed to give young people experience in public speaking and reviewing legal documents, as well as provide an opportunity for them to obtain some financial support to continue their education. The National Bar Association's NBA First Annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major for Justice Advocacy Competition was held at its 75th Annual Convention in Washington, D.C. in 2000. As a result of the overwhelming success of the competition, the NBA, with the support of the National Bar Institute, NBI, adopted it as a national program. Please welcome to the stage the President of the National Bar Association, Carlos Moore.
My name is Judge Carlos E. Moore, and I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as the 2021-2022 President of the National Bar Association. As your NBA President, I took a stance against injustice any and everywhere. I am a strong, tenacious advocate for the advancement and uplifting of African Americans across the country and around the world. My slogan was, "Stand up, NBA." I would like to applaud all of the 2022 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major for Justice Advocacy competitors for standing up by accepting the challenge to participate in this competition. I would like to personally congratulate all of you for representing your regions in this national competition. The Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major for Justice Advocacy Competition is a contest designed to motivate high school students to excel in education. The competition gives students the opportunity to express their views and allows them to experience public speaking and legal research. The inaugural Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major for Justice Advocacy Competition was held at the 75th Annual Convention in Washington, D.C. in 2000. My very first NBA conference. I'm proud to welcome you to the 22nd anniversary of this competition. And again, I would like to congratulate you on your participation. Since 2000, the National Bar Association, through the National Bar Institute, has awarded over $300,000 in scholarships to students across the country. As the world debates the topic of student loan debt forgiveness and the unique circumstances of African Americans' student loan debt, I look forward to your remarks regarding the 2022 competition topic. If Dr. King were alive today, would he support canceling student loan debt in hopes of giving Blacks financial freedom and a better quality of life? Would Dr. King support student loans or tuition-free colleges? Thank you to all of the regional directors and to the 2022 Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major for Justice Advocacy Competition committee members and Chair Andrea Evans for making this competition a success. Thank you to the NBI and to the commercial law section of the NBA for your sponsorship and helping to provide these students with financial support to continue their education. All of you continue to play an integral role in the success of this competition. Congratulations on a successful competition. Thank you to everyone for your continued support of this amazing program. Welcome to the 2022 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major for Justice Advocacy Competition. Let the competition begin. Again, it's my pleasure to serve as the 79th President of the National Bar Association. Thank you. And good luck.
Please welcome to the stage Chair of the National Bar Institute, Walter Sutton.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the National Bar Institute Board of Directors, I wish to extend greetings to the annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major for Justice Advocacy competition. This competition provides an opportunity for high school students to hone their public speaking skills. The first competition was held in Washington, D.C. in the year 2000. Since that time, NBI has awarded college scholarships to over 120 students. Through the generous support of our corporate sponsors, including FedEx, General Motors, State Farm Insurance, Walmart, the Nassau Paradise Island Promotion Board, and with the support of the National Bar Association Commercial Law Section, we have assisted students to defray the cost of attending colleges and universities across the country. We are grateful to the Commercial Law Section and to our chair, Andrea Evans, for their commitment of time and resources to the competition. I would like to thank the Planning Committee and the NBA Regional Directors for their efforts to make this competition a success. Lastly, I would like to congratulate the students and their parents for winning their respective regional competitions and a cash award. Please enjoy the competition as you observe the students exhibiting their oratory skills. Be well and stay safe. Thank you.
Region 1, Rayana Sumter. Region 2, Justice Bunch Wimberly. Region 5, Raleigh Ramanake. Region 6, Micaiah Hurd. Region 7, Jordan Williams. Region 8, Layla English. Region 9, Jolie Wilson. Region 11, Tyler Daniel. Region 12, Blair Batista. Please welcome your judges. Judge Kimberly Esmond Adams, Atlanta, Georgia. Judge Gail Barriola, Oakland, California. Judge Herman Marable, Jr., Flint, Michigan. Please welcome your host, National Chair of the competition, Attorney Andrea H. Evans.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major for Justice Advocacy competition. My name is Andrea Evans, and I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as your national chair this year. And I'm really excited to welcome you to this competition and thank you all for your time and for joining us. And congratulations to all of the contestants. The Drum Major for Justice Advocacy competition is a contest designed to motivate high school students to excel in education. The competition encourages students to express their views on a pre-selected topic that focuses on your ability to communicate orally and in writing. It's also designed to give you an experience in public speaking, reviewing legal documents, research, and we're doing our part to provide a little financial support to you all. So congratulations again for getting this far. The competition was held at the convention in 2000, and as a result of its overwhelming success, we've continued with this with the support of the National Bar Institute. And this is a national program, so we want to thank you all for joining us from all around the country.
The 2022 question. Student loans are one of the highest sources of debt for Americans. Racial disparities in student debt have grown dramatically in recent decades. Black and African American college graduates owe an average of $25,000 more in student loan debt than white college graduates. 4 years after graduation, 48% of black students owe an average of 12.5% more than they borrowed. Black borrowers liken student loan debt to Jim Crow, saying it deepens racial inequality. Many respondents believe student loans were not set up to give Black Americans financial freedom, and they disrupt their quality of life and mental health. Others argue that student loan debt is good debt because you get a college education which can help you to increase your earning potential. If Dr. King were alive today, would he support canceling student loan debt in hopes of giving blacks financial freedom and a better quality of life? Would Dr. King support student loans or tuition-free colleges? If so, explain why. If not, explain why not.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to contestant 1 from Region 1. Let's welcome Rayana Sumter.
Good evening. I'm Rayana Sumter. I'm from Milton, Massachusetts, representing Region 1. I'm a junior at Milton High School. Thank you for this opportunity and being here to listen to me. We're portrayed as loud, impatient, violent. When we fight, we're knocked back down. When we protest, we're silenced. When we say no more, we're told to wait a little longer. We're not fighting just to cause a riot. We're fighting for the basic necessities to access opportunities of any kind. The right to pen and paper. Brown versus Board of Education deemed separate but equal unconstitutional in 1954. But today, in 2022, the struggle presents itself in a different form. Collectively, students owe over $1.7 trillion in student loans. While 54% of this debt is held by white students, on average, Black students owe $25,000 more. But Black people hold 4% of the nation's wealth, while white people hold 84%. So we now find ourselves stranded on the lonely island of poverty that Martin Luther King referred to. He believed that capitalism would have to crumble for racial equality to bloom. Universities that were intended to serve the public have morphed into private corporations. So as the cost of attending university has continued to climb since 1980, Martin Luther King would support the cancellation of student loan debt to ensure financial freedom for Black people. Forgiving loans creates financial freedom and the freedom to achieve at higher levels. King established the Poor People's Campaign in 1967 with the ultimate goal of freedom, independence, and self-determination. So there's no doubt that relieving graduates of student loan debt would aid in achieving this goal. Thus, King will support forgiving loans not only to ensure the financial freedom of Black people, but for all people. He said, "We cannot walk alone. We live in a world of converging paths where each struggle is connected. Therefore, every person, regardless of race, should be given the opportunity to reach financial freedom." Towards the end of his career, he was radical and unapologetic in his support for the insurance of economic security. He spoke against the idea of pulling oneself up by the bootstraps because some don't have straps. Consider that over the next 10 years, 90% of jobs will require post-secondary education. And imagine the over 3 million high-achieving but low-income students applying to top colleges where tuition is double or even triple their family's income. It's like a pig attempting to fly. But the cancellation of student loans and tuition-free colleges gives the bootless boots. Education is an integral component of economic autonomy. The power to think unfiltered thoughts and to use them to build oneself up is the ultimate mark of financial independence. MLK said that education grants man the power to achieve with increasing facility the legitimate goals of his life. An educated citizen grasps the world from a broader perspective. So with larger wells of knowledge comes the ability to think more intensively and critically. They're creating more informed financial decisions, like whether to open that credit card or not, deciding if it makes more sense to rent or to buy, or if that new Model Y Tesla is worth it. These decisions lead to stability, and stability leads to wealth. Wealth is able to be passed down. Being sent back to start for centuries has financially set Black people back generations. 20% fewer Black people received inheritances when compared to white people. Tuition-free college and loan forgiveness now can mean economic security for countless generations later. It's critical to not only think about the financial anxiety that comes with attending college, but also the beauty and fulfillment it brings as well. Videos of HBCU students often circulate the internet, and each video radiates pride and gratitude. Dr. Martin Luther King, a graduate of Morehouse, would staunchly support tuition-free colleges so that more Black and Brown students could share in the experiences cultivated on these campuses, but without sharing in the financial burden. In conclusion, I believe Dr. King would support the cancellation of student loan debt because education is a necessity, like food and water. King quickly would undertake student loans and tuition-free college in his fight for civil rights because he dreamed for all children to have material well-being for their bodies and education for their minds. Education is a right to be afforded to all, and not just those who can afford it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up from Region 2, we have Justice Bunch Wimberly.
My name is Justice Bunch Wimberly. I'm representing Region 2. I just graduated from Long Island Lutheran Middle and High School, and I will be attending Savannah College of Art and Design in the fall. Thank you for this opportunity. The disparity in higher education between Blacks and whites continues the vicious cycle of racism in America. Only the complete cancellation of all student debt will protect Black students and their families from financial ruin while establishing higher education as a universal right. In effect, it would offer restitution to African Americans who have had to rely on the financing of debt to pursue upward mobility through higher education. There is a growing debate among Americans as to whether student loan debt should be canceled. I believe that student loan debt should be canceled, and I believe that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would agree as well. Since the first slave ship touched upon the shores of North America in 1619 and over 150 years since emancipation, the lives of Black people remain hampered by the claims of racial discrimination. Oppressive student loan debt creates an outcome similar to Jim Crow laws. Not only are Black Americans unable to achieve the American dream, but they must sacrifice securing basic necessities such as food, shelter, and comprehensive medical care because many Blacks are beset with high student loan payments. The Jim Crow laws were enacted to enforce racial segregation on a state and local level, the goal being the continued oppression of African Americans. It's been 60 years since the end of the Jim Crow era, and we find ourselves suffering from significant disadvantages through the enactment of federal student loans and Parent Plus loans. If Black and African Americans owe 25% more in student loans than our white counterparts and are significantly less than the goal of Jim Crow laws have come to fruition. Segregation in neighborhoods, education, and healthcare, as we can't afford to have access to the same things. Higher education is for many a necessary step to earn a living wage, but Black students face a particularly cumbersome burden to finance their degrees. The negative economic and psychological consequences of student loan debt are distorting employment choices and depressing opportunities amongst Black and African Americans. Everyday evidence suggests that student debt impedes the financial growth of Black borrowers and their families, especially those who have not completed their degree. Black students have the highest rate of default student loans, with 42% of those being Blacks who have attended private colleges or universities. However, in my opinion, if Dr. King were alive today, he would support the cancellation of student loan debt for both Black and whites because Dr. King believed in equality for all human beings. This was Dr. King's urgent mission and major theme in his legendary I Have a Dream speech, which influenced the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The cancellation of student borrowing and loan debt will give Black people an equal seat at the table, financial freedom, and a better quality of life. On August 28, 1963, approximately 59 years ago, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, Dr. King eloquently spoke of equality for all Black and white people to be treated equally as to be educated. Sadly, the amount of student loan debt across America has ballooned over the past 4 decades. By the time I graduated college, my family will owe approximately $300,000 in student loan debt, and that is before interest. On top of that, my mother is still paying back her student loans. Student loans are a generational curse. This is just for an undergraduate degree. What about individuals who need to pursue a master's, Juris Doctorate, or PhD? Will I earn to pay my loans back and/or be able to help my parents pay back their loans? Where college was once seen as a ladder to upward social mobility, students increasingly need a college education to simply remain where they are socioeconomically. Our government promised $13.6 billion in military aid to Ukraine, which is very noble, but Black Americans here at home are in dire need of financial assistance. As of April 2022, approximately 1.7 trillion in student loan debt exists. About 80 billion of that debt was incurred by non-white individuals, but Black women had the largest student loan debt in 2021. I would say that African Americans and Blacks would be much better served by the cancellation of student loan debt and/or tuition-free higher education as a form of reparations. Maybe the US should follow the lead of other countries such as Germany, Norway, France, Sweden, and the United Kingdom who believe in providing free or low-cost tuition. These countries follow the ideology of democratic socialism. They believe that their governments should provide a range of essential services such as free or discounted healthcare and education. Many foreign countries currently provide for such an education as they believe education to be an essential service that the government should provide, whereas in America, higher education is viewed as a luxury. The United States is way more wealthier than these countries. In fact, we are the wealthiest country in the world. In a 1947 essay entitled The Purpose of Education, Dr. King stated, "We must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. Our government should focus on building intelligence and character as opposed to oppression and debt." In conclusion, if Dr. King were alive today, and given the poor state the American education system is in, he would propose removing the burden of student loan debt and the full cancellation of all undergraduate and graduate, federal and private student loan balances. I believe that he would advocate for free or low-cost higher education.
Thank you, Justice. Next up from Region 5, let's welcome Riley Reminick.
Good afternoon. My name is Riley, and I will be attending Xavier University in the fall as a freshman. If Dr. King were alive today, he would support canceling student loan debt. In his I Have a Dream speech, he said, "America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds." Dr. King wanted Blacks to have financial freedom and a better quality of life. This metaphor is still true today. If Dr. King were still alive, he would advocate students to have a better quality of life. It is my belief that Dr. King would continue to remove barriers that students are facing when trying to obtain a college education. Dr. King would support an initiative for tuition-free colleges based on three main reasons. First, Dr. King acknowledged that funding for education has not been equitably allocated to the Black community. He upheld that funding should be funneled to the Black community. Next, Dr. King acknowledged that Black Americans have been economically inferior since slavery. And finally, Dr. King believed that economic justice is simply the right thing to do. The Black community has consistently been overlooked. Therefore, Dr. King advocated for fair and equal economic treatment for minorities. During the Civil Rights Movement, he focused on ensuring that proper education funding was in place for Black communities. During an award acceptance speech in 1964, he said, "Therefore, as Negroes have been free, they have had to fight for the opportunity for a decent education. The richest nation on earth has never allocated enough resources to build sufficient schools." Although this was in 1964, in 2022, Black American students are still fighting for economic justice to get a college education. A study done by the Education Data Initiative in 2022 reports that 50.8% of Black students use student loans to fund their education. 66% of Black borrowers regret having taken out student loans to fund their education. 2 years later, in 1968, Dr. King began to launch the Poor People's Campaign, where he gave the Other America speech. He claimed that every American city has two sides, one where there is a dream and the other is reality. In this reality, there is an economic problem. This economic problem that he is referring to is systematic racism. Systematic racism is something that has greatly affected Black Americans since being freed as slaves. Slavery has caused Black Americans to have economic setbacks. The Education Data Initiative study also reported that, on average, Black college graduates owe $25,000 more in student loan debt than white college graduates. By providing a free college education, the overall economic standing of Black Americans would be improved. When students are in debt, they are 36% less likely to buy a home and 11% less likely to start a business. Because Black graduates owe more than white graduates do, and 50% of Black student borrowers' net worth is less than what they owe in student debt, the Black community will never be economically equal to other racial groups. Dr. King would advocate for free college because he would see that it is the relief needed to economically advance the Black community. Dr. King was a passionate advocate for two things: justice and education. He understood the importance of how education advanced the condition of minorities and eliminated long-standing societal prejudices. In a Morehouse College news column, Dr. King wrote, "Education must enable one to shift and weigh evidence, to discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, and the facts from the fiction." As an advocate for these two things, Dr. King would be disappointed to know that 66% of Black borrowers report that they regret having taken out student loans to fund their education. He would encourage our leaders to stand up and do what is right for our future generations. In closing, Dr. King would encourage us to not turn our backs on this problem. He would encourage us to take a stand so that all students have access to a college education. It is time for students to be free from debt and free from the stress of funding a college education. It is time for education to be free at last. Thank you.
And we are going to move on to Region 6, Micaiah Hurd.
Hi, everyone. My name is Micaiah Hurd. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, representing Region 6 today. I recently graduated from Renaissance High School, and this fall I will be attending Florida A&M University, studying political science on the track for pre-law. On June 23rd, 1963, a crowd of more than 100,000 people walked with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. down Woodward Avenue, a main street in downtown Detroit, my hometown. 2 months later, on August 28th, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his I Have a Dream speech. And 59 years later, African Americans are still awaiting the promises that the Declaration of Independence placed upon us 225 years ago. The ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness have been greatly diminished. Much like the injustices that our ancestors faced, America has once again cashed African Americans a bad check, failing to honor their debts of justice. As I end my high school journey, I have become hyper aware to the financial disparities within the United States. I would have never imagined that I would have to add student loan debts to my everlasting list of racial inequities. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood for equity and equality. Equity, the equality of being fair and impartial. Equality, being equal in rights, status, and opportunities. If Dr. King were here to guide us today, he would fight to end the racial disparity of student loan debt, giving each American equal opportunity to have their fulfilling life with a flourishing earning potential, no matter their color. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, 100 years later, the Negro lives on a poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself exiled in his own land. Today, African Americans are still languished, owing an average of $25,000 more in student loan debt than their white college graduates. 50% of African Americans are burdened with student loan debt higher than their net worth. This prohibits African Americans from the qualities and milestones of life that everyone deserves to experience. In a study done by research analyst Melanie Hansen in March of 2022, she reported that 46% of African American students waited to buy a home because they were financially drowning. 43% of African American students found it imperative to work longer work shifts to afford the cost of student living while paying off their student loans. While African Americans are each battling a financial crisis, 83% of their white counterparts owe 12% less than what they borrowed. What intensifies this matter is that white women who are bachelor's degree holders make 19% more than Black women who are also bachelor's degree holders. White men who have bachelor's degrees make 30% more than Black men who have the exact same degree. No matter the measure of success African Americans accomplish, we are still alienated in our own country. Where is our equity and where is the equality? In Dr. King's A Single Garment of Destiny, he acknowledged that the immoral values of our nation would inevitably become its downfall. Dr. King says, a true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our present policies. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. A true revolution of values will soon look on uneasily upon the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth with righteous indignation. Due to institutional racism's presence having remained as large as it was 60 years ago, Dr. King would undoubtedly establish a program to aid African Americans. He would take the initiative to teach Black students financial literacy. Fighting for an equal distribution of wealth, Dr. King would guide African American students in their financial recovery. Considering he had a surplus amount of support from many businesses, Dr. King can negotiate financial aid in the form of scholarships. Dr. King's goal would not be to cancel student loan debt for African Americans only, but for every Black individual to have the same chance as white individuals. Tuition-free institutions will undoubtedly have Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as an advocate. Dr. King felt strongly about education, and knowing that finances were preventing students from having a fulfilling education in life would bring blighted hope. In Dr. King's The Purpose of Education, he stated, education which stops efficiency may prove the greatest menace to society. In a sense, that tuition-free institutions would allow African Americans the same financial freedom as whites. Dr. King would prefer this method rather than young African Americans sacrificing milestones in order to pay back a government that is treating them unfairly. With the oppression that African Americans are continuing to face, our accomplishments have been impressive. By adopting a system that ensures us financial stability, our statistic of earning less than the white individual would dramatically decrease. As always, our efforts to uplift each other will eliminate the efforts of those trying to bring us down. This obstacle set forth is prohibiting many of us from greatness, and this very same obstacle will not stand tall for much longer, as we all will knock it down as one. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said in Letter from Birmingham Jail, oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. Their yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself. In conclusion, if Dr. King were alive today, he would absolutely support canceling student loan debt for African Americans if that would give them equal opportunity as white individuals. He would also support tuition-free institutions as it would not be a financial hindrance to anyone, no matter their color. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, let's welcome from Region 7, Jordan Williams.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am so excited to be here today. My name is Jordan Williams, and I will be attending Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana in the fall of 2022. A sea of church hats the size of large lily pads float in the air. Brightly colored, some with bows or rhinestones. I look around and reflect on the love for God inside my church, a hidden gem located in a drug-ravaged neighborhood. Initially, going to church every Sunday was a drag, and I looked forward to the naps I would take on the cherry-colored seats. Unknown to me at the time, church was my first real platform. Dressed in all white, I hesitated to give an Easter speech in front of a crowd. Over time, though, I became excited to share my talents, happily volunteering to play the bass guitar during service, praise dancing to Church on the Moon, and performing Twas the Night Before Christmas. After researching Martin Luther King Jr., I noticed how his favorite combination in his speeches were about God and education. In addition, Martin Luther King Jr. has repeatedly told us that it's important for Black people in America to have access to opportunities in order to build wealth. However, how can you ever accumulate wealth if you are constantly repaying the cost of education back? Research shows that Black college graduates owe an average of $25,000 more in student loan debt than white college graduates. It wasn't until the conversation about affording college came up that I realized how many students are not able to attend school because of the cost of attendance, and I panicked when I realized I could potentially be one of them. Martin Luther King Jr. was a man and minister who advocated for opportunity and equal rights. Aware of the social political climate in America at that time, Dr. King wrote about the depressing state of the Black community and the lack of access to equal opportunity. This was clear when he spoke in 1968 and said that by the millions, people in the other America find themselves perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. The fact is that the Black man in the United States of America is facing a literal depression. It's clear that economically, Black families weren't equipped with the right tools to escape poverty, but Dr. King was a strong believer in the power of education and God. Dr. King has a memorial, a statue in Washington, D.C. The inscription upon that statue reads, "He was a drum major for justice, peace, and righteousness." Righteousness. So when asked if Dr. King would support student loan debt forgiveness, the answer is manifest. A man of righteousness would see the enduring chains of slavery have now taken the form of debilitating debt. When Dr. King delivered his I Have a Dream speech, he said, "We've come to our nation's capital to cash a check, and that it was obvious America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds." Therefore, I strongly believe that if Martin Luther King Jr. were alive today, he would support canceling all student loan debt, regardless of race, gender, or class, especially with the hopes of putting Black people on the path to financial freedom and a better quality of life. We have seen countless times in Dr. King's speeches the emphasis he places on gaining an education, especially when he says, "Education must enable a man to become more efficient, to achieve with increasing facility the legitimate goals of his life." Dr. King also understood what type of society you create if you hold hostage education and only allow for those who can afford it to attend. Many Black Americans would not be students in America today because they could not afford it. This is evident in Dr. King's The Purpose of Education, where he wrote, "If we are not careful, our colleges will produce a group of closed-minded, unscientific, illogical propagandists consumed with immoral acts." If Dr. King were to imagine the countless students across America today who are forced to cancel their post-secondary education due to financial reasons, he would shame America for their contradictory and juxtaposed position as the land of the free, for gatekeeping proper education. Dr. King would be disappointed in the news that universities are charging upwards of $75,000 in order to garner a college education, especially when the average Black household in America today makes less than $45,000 annually. As African Americans, we are told by countless individuals that we have to work twice as hard to achieve our goals. And I believe that Dr. King would agree with that. For over 400 years, African Americans haven't been free to receive an education at all. Instead, we were subject to poverty, abuse, and discrimination. However, Black people like you and I represent our ancestors' wildest dreams, who have had to work hard despite the obstacles. Whilst racism isn't as overt now in the 21st century, it's taken root in our justice systems, education systems, and more. Would Dr. King, a righteous man, an intellect, a minister, and a powerful advocate for opportunity and equal rights, recognize this as an American system that is still riddled with racism and classism? The answer is he would. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jordan. Next up, let's welcome from Region 8, Layla English.
Hi, my name is Layla English. I'm from Kansas City, Kansas, and I graduated from Piper High School. And I'm going to go to KU in the fall of 2022. According to the U.S. Department of Education, there is $1.6 trillion in federal and private student loan debt. According to the data from the May 2021 census, 43 million Americans have student loan debt. That's 1 in 8 Americans. Black students borrow more often in greater amounts compared to all other races and ethnicities. 92% of student loans are owned by the U.S. Department of Education. The federal student aid data shows that there are currently 5.3 million federal loan borrowers in default. Data from the federal student forgiveness dated April 2021 shows that only 8,429 out of 391,333 applicants were approved. That's an average of 2.1%. Borrowers' defense to repayment shows that only 94,784 applicants were approved out of 362,454. The government gives grants such as the Pell Grant, but only if the FAFSA is completed on time. Research from the class of 2018 shows that $2.6 billion was left unclaimed due to students failing to complete their FAFSA. Black Americans deserve the chance to better their quality of life. Higher education is necessary in order to accomplish that. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness should not be blocked by the heavy weight of debt associated with getting an education. Dr. King would definitely support canceling student loan debt in hopes to give people financial freedom and a better quality of life. I do not believe that Dr. King would have wanted the stress that student loans comes with, even if it meant that people could gain degrees. Dr. King once said, America might have to move to a democratic socialism. Democratic socialism is defined as having a socialist economy, which means of production are socially and collectively owned or controlled, alongside a liberal democratic political system of government. This will allow public colleges and universities to be funded by the government. The United Nations reported long ago that U.S. owed Black Americans reparations for slavery. According to the UN working groups of experts on people of African descent, the only way to combat the disadvantages caused by the 245 years of slavery was by compensation. After the Civil War, the U.S. made attempts to provide reparations by giving freed families land, but that was promptly reversed. Jim Crow years added to the disadvantages Black Americans suffered in this country, and the push for mass incarceration was an added burden as well. The end result of Black Americans were unable to build generational wealth on the same level as their white counterparts, who already had a head start. It seems though with every step forward that the civil rights movement took, there was always a law that blocked the progress of Black Americans. The government owes Black Americans reparation for all the barriers put in place. Without access to equal lending from freedom to live where they wanted in order to have access to better school systems for their children, generational wealth was impossible for the majority of Black Americans. This, I believe, is why more Black Americans resort to borrowing money for higher education. Dr. King once said, exclusion of African Americans from economic opportunities is murder in the first degree. A lot of families do not attend college because they know they can't afford it. A lot of families, they do not have the luxuries to save money away when they have everyday bills that need to be paid. This causes a real divide when it comes to having higher paying jobs and when it comes to acquiring wealth. Dr. King would have supported tuition-free colleges. The government could make ways to pay for expenses of a college education by providing more grant money with no deadline, such as the one the FAFSA has. They could close corporate loopholes so that big businesses weren't able to avoid paying taxes. Rich people in this country should have a higher tax rate. The government could stop wasting money on things that don't matter and actually write a budget that could fund colleges and universities to the point where they are free for all U.S. citizens. I believe that Dr. King would have supported canceling student debt for Black Americans as an initiative towards reparations. If Black Americans didn't have to worry about large amounts of student debt, then more would choose to attend college. With this education, they could be in professions where they've been historically underrepresented. I believe Dr. King would have also supported canceling student debt for all citizens who work public services and all who are serving their country in the military, even if they're not approved under the student loan forgiveness or a repayment program. These colleges and universities could be properly funded if there is a redistribution of funds that the government could coordinate. Thank you.
Thank you, Layla. Next up, let's welcome Jolie Wilson from Region 9.
Hello, I'm Jolie Wilson. I am a rising senior at Corbin Community in Charlotte, North Carolina. Thank you. Today, research shows that Blacks in America pay the highest amount of money in college tuition because of student loan debt. Let's explore this circumstance and consider the probable perspective of the Honorable Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King recognized how student loan debt hinders the Black American household and gives less motivation to Black students to pursue a higher education. Student loans are a crushing debt, and Dr. King would also point out how African Americans have historically fought for a higher position in our nation's economic pyramid, but continue to exist near the bottom of that pyramid. And for many, student loan inequality plays a significant role. If Dr. King was alive, he would support canceling student loan debt in hopes of lifting the burden of the cost of a college education. We live in a capitalist society where wealthy individuals fix the economy to favor their own interests. Because of generational wealth and the lasting impact of the institutions of slavery, segregation, and systemic racism, white people tend to be those wealthy individuals. For example, why is it when Black people are experiencing an economic decline, it's called a social problem? But when white people are experiencing an economic decline, it's called a depression. In Dr. King's 1967 speech at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, he said, "We must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? When you begin to ask that question, you are raising more questions about our economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. We've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society." End quote. In the absence of a free college education, Dr. King would support student loans. I say this because Dr. King believed that through education, a person can achieve with increasing facility legitimate goals of his or her life. Many Black and African American students are unable to attend college or university because they simply cannot afford it. In today's society, according to the Education Data Initiative, 50% of Black students acquire student loans. From this statistic, we can go back and ask the question, if there was no such thing as student loans, would more Black students attend college? We must consider that unlike some of their white counterparts, many Black students don't come from generational wealth. Generational wealth can simply be defined as wealth stemming from home ownership or excess capital available to fund higher education. Furthermore, white students don't have ancestors that experienced the horrors of slavery like African American students. As Black students, our grandparents had Jim Crow laws forced upon them, while white students' grandparents did not. These factors have had lasting effects on the ability of many Black people to obtain home ownership and attend college. Today, there are politicians campaigning for tuition-free colleges. If Dr. King were alive, he too would champion this effort. Although some would argue that free tuition will devalue a college degree, it is a fact that free tuition would actually encourage more people to attend college and increase graduation rates. Access to tuition-free college education through scholarships or grants is often the sole means by which many of today's Black students are able to attend college. Scholarships are not available for everyone. So many of us cannot afford to attend college or university. For many marginalized people, College is our opportunity to obtain generational wealth. The inequity in education is compounded by the fact that thousands of young Black Americans are deprived of an adequate education early in life. Dr. King says it's not because they're dumb, not because they don't have the native intelligence, but because the schools they attended are so inadequate, so overcrowded, so devoid of quality, so segregated, if you will, that the best of these minds can never reach their full potential. Dr. King made this observation more than 50 years ago, but this is still the case to this very day. Ibram Kendi, a modern anti-racism activist, states that the reason for inequality is policy. In Dr. King's speech, The Other America, he spoke about there being two Americas. The first America is filled with all the available materials and necessities needed to prosper in life, while the other America could only dream to prosper like the first. The other America is made up of poverty, destitution, and hardship. Probably the most critical problem in this other America is an economic problem. There are so many people in this other America who can never make ends meet because their jobs are devoid of quality. Who are the people who live in this other America? People of color. How could we as a community in today's society give Black students financial freedom to achieve a better quality of life? Maybe we start by investing more money into historically Black colleges and universities. We can invest by simply donating or even encouraging our future college students to attend an HBCU. We can also explore ways to reestablish what was once affirmative action by requiring traditionally white institutions to admit African American or other marginalized people at rates of at least 20% of those accepted. The adoption of the solutions above would help our community acquire better jobs to attain wealth to pass down into the future. Our people will be more educated, have financial freedom, as well as a better quality of life. Each person should be able to achieve the highest level of excellence they choose to attain. Society in the world would be better for it. Imagine what social problems could have been solved, what medical diseases could have been eradicated, had every single bright person with talent and drive been given the opportunity to reach the highest level of their potential. Making college accessible to all who want to attend is not just a benefit we give to those who are disenfranchised. It is a gift we give to the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolie. Next up, let's welcome Tyler Daniel from Region 11.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tyler Daniel. I am a rising senior at Lincoln Park Academy in Fort Pierce, Florida. And before I begin, I would like to note that I am out of the country, so I do apologize ahead of time for any issues with my connection. Without further ado, I proudly represent District 11. Borrowing financial loans are essential for an ever-growing number of students seeking higher level education. And now, more than ever, the topic of student loans is being discussed in association with student loan forgiveness. However, the burdens of student loans linger as they disproportionately affect Black and Latinx students in comparison to their white counterparts. Given this, debt undermines the purpose and meaning of higher education as possibilities are still limited for non-white students. Such disadvantage extends back to students who belong to groups who are historically subordinated based on race, and thus demonstrates the inequities in access to education. Racial and economic inequality related to student loans is likened to the disparities associated with Jim Crow. From their inception, schools and universities serving students of color received significantly less funding than schools serving white students and faced overcrowding, inadequate supplies, and insufficiently paid teachers. Essentially, treatment and teaching accommodations for Black Americans were always inferior to those provided by white Americans. Although days of blatant and socially acceptable segregation are not as prevalent, systematic separation still exists. Modern day segregation exacerbates the wealth and education gaps in minority communities. Notwithstanding his important activism philosophy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a proponent of equal access to education. In a statement written by Dr. King for Morehouse College's student paper, he noted that education must enable a man to become more efficient, to achieve with increasing facility the legitimate goals of his life, which is demonstrative of King's overall belief in education, a pursuit of power and success to be held with integrity and compassion. The phenomenon of racial oppression and inequality by debt is not new. Student debt contributes to racial subordination more subtly than outright exclusion. Historically, to keep the Black population oppressed was to deprive them of the opportunity for a proper education. In spite of the roads to equality and citizenship that have cleared since the abolition of slavery, a quasi-freedom remains thanks to student lending. King was also a proponent of the Higher Education Act of 1965, also referred to as the HEA, which focused on providing students with the opportunity to pursue higher education, to achieve their full potential regardless of poverty, and to contribute to the wider national community. The HEA did not intend to perpetuate racial and socioeconomic inequality through the imposition of injurious debt, nor did Dr. King. According to data tabulated in early March of 2022 by the Education Data Initiative, statistics reveal that Black and African American college graduates owe an average of $25,000 more in student loan debt than white college graduates. And 4 years after graduation, 48% of Black students own an average of 12.5% more than they borrowed. Such data reflects the dramatic disparities in financial health from one community to the next. Student loans are not mere numbers or calculations. Rather, they are financially devastating loans that become millstones around the necks of those who must pay them off. Thus, while education loans assist many students in overcoming financial barriers when accessing higher education, Dr. King would be opposed to student loans and would instead support tuition-free education. In addition to the foregoing, it is feasible that Dr. King would advocate for financial literacy education for non-white students. To fail to account for economic inequality is to close the vaults of opportunity in the United States. Ultimately, Dr. King was outspoken and steadfast in his efforts to dismantle the racial hierarchy between Jim Crow racism and the hierarchy of economic privilege created by an exploitative capitalist system. Such an attitude would be mirrored today if Dr. King were alive, to advocate for providing financial freedom to Black Americans and overall better quality of life. As Dr. King reminds us, freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. Let's welcome Blair Batista from Region 12.
Hello, I'm Blair Batista, graduating senior, attending Northwestern University in the fall, double majoring in political science and legal studies. In the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., for years now I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see that justice too long delayed is justice denied. If Dr. King was alive today, he would be in support of canceling student loan debt in hopes of giving minorities financial freedom and a better quality of life. Black, brown, and marginalized communities have been waiting too long for education and economic equality. Dr. King veiled in uplifting the Black community and fighting back against segregation and the horrible mistreatment that we, Black people, still face today in a peaceful manner. Dr. King wanted equality for the Black community by flourishing and becoming leaders of society. That dream he once had can only happen with the help of furthering students to higher education, and that only happens with canceling student loan debt or tuition-free colleges. Without a doubt, Dr. King would support the forgiveness of student loans. Dr. King would have categorized this process of forgiveness as a positive step towards freedom. Although many people focus on the social justice element of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, the beginning of that speech focused on economic justice for Black and brown people. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. With the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was the promise that all men, yes, Black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note, and so far as her citizens of color are concerned, instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. This excerpt from Dr. King's speech illustrates that he advocated for economic justice reform for Black, brown, and marginalized communities. Tuition-free college would build on the idea from Dr. King's speech of the American economy, which was built on the economic inequality of Blacks. In 2022, these are still pressing, life-altering issues that deeply affect my community and impact my generation. If you were to ask most minorities about the issue that keeps them from advancing, the answer will most likely be systemic racism of the American economic system. This is what Dr. King was sharing with the world almost 60 years ago in 1963. The economic system has held back the progress of the Black community. I would also stress the importance of expanding education and economic opportunities for Black, brown, and marginalized communities. My peers and I, as the next generation, need to be empowered to focus on how America's economy has never worked fairly for Black, brown, and marginalized communities. The main way it has never worked is the reliance the Black community has had on student loans and to try to achieve the American dream of a higher education. With the lack of generational wealth, the only way most Blacks could attend college and beyond was to take out student loans. Black students and their families were sucked into the myth that student loan debt was good debt that could be paid off quickly. It was clear that this was a myth that has been growing in the Black community for at least 35 years. President and First Lady Obama did not pay off their student loan debt until President Obama received a book deal. They even acknowledged that they should have been saving for their daughter's education, but instead had to work on paying off their own first. Most Blacks with student loan debt never get the opportunity to pay off their debt with a large windfall like the Obamas. Too many Blacks have six-figure debt with five-figure income. This disparity in income versus debt makes it impossible for the Black community to thrive and build generational wealth. After graduation, loans and student debt quickly ballooned, delaying or even preventing Blacks from building wealth. According to the analysis of the Census Bureau 2018 survey of income and program participation, SNP, there is a significant wealth disparity between Black and non-Blacks at every age group, and Blacks are not building wealth at the same pace as their non-Blacks, particularly in the prime working ages. Blacks' economic position is often precarious, and defaulting can actively jeopardize their financial health. Yet when we talk about the student debt cancellation, rarely is that conversation centered around the experiences of Blacks, missing a significant part of the problem. More than 49% of Black students borrow $30,000 or more to pay off college, have a tremendous amount of student loans, whereas it's only 30% for their white counterparts, stated by an article posted by the Council of Foreign Relations. It is imperative for minorities to break educational and economic barriers by taking on political roles and encouraging this generation, my generation, to get involved in the political process on local, state, and national levels. And whether by willful intent or gross negligence, many of these engage in policy debates, overlook the compounding effect of racism and how it specifically impacts Black borrowers. Education is so important, and I know that Dr. King would want to make sure everyone had an opportunity to seek a higher education. Put it simple, student debt is a racial and economic justice issue, and any proposed solution to that student debt crisis must center around the perspective, lived realities, and voices of Black borrowers, rather than solely use their data to frame the problem. This will assist minorities to continue with fighting for racial and economic equality and justice if we were ever to advance as a nation and become one America, finally fulfilling Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. Dr. King would use all his power to urge President Biden to cancel student loans for Black and Brown and marginalized communities so they could have an opportunity to participate in the American dream. The same way he urged President Johnson to pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone here this evening. This has been an amazing competition. I want to personally congratulate you all and thank you for your participation.
And now, announcing the winners of the 2022 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major for Justice Advocacy Competition. Third place, Jolie Wilson, Region 9. Second place, Blair Batista, Region 12. First place, Tyler Daniel, Region 11. A special thank you to our 2022 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major for Justice Advocacy Competition Committee members. Thank you to our sponsors, National Bar Association, National Bar Association Commercial Law Section, and National Bar Institute. This concludes the 2022 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major for Justice Advocacy Competition.